Welcome, everybody. My name's Wendy Fenton, and I'm the coordinator of the Humanitarian Practice Network here at ODI. And I'd like to welcome our panelists, all of you in the room, and the online audience to today's event. And this is focusing on the Rohingya crisis, and we're looking at voices from the field. This also features the latest edition of the Humanitarian Exchange, which is number 73, which we've entitled Rohingya Refugees in Bangladesh, the Humanitarian Response. And I think you've all got copies on your chairs, so feel free to take those with you. Before we start, I just ask that you could put your phones on silent, please. You can continue to tweet and other things, but use the hashtag Rohingya crisis. And over the past year, more than 700,000 people have fled to Bangladesh to escape violence and persecution in Rakhine State in Myanmar. And the Rohingya, as you know, have suffered persecution for decades, but it's really only this most recent mass exodus which has attracted sort of sustained international attention. The government of Bangladesh doesn't officially recognize the Rohingya as refugees. They have limited rights and freedoms in country, and they're housed in overcrowded camps, lacking adequate assistance and protection in many cases. And resources are increasingly stretched because people have continued to come, and they've really turned Cox's Bazar into the biggest refugee settlement in the world. The recent monsoon and cyclone rains have also added to the misery by destroying or damaging infrastructure and services. And operational organizations in Cox's Bazar, and I think a number of you here today and online are working for many of those, have faced significant challenges in responding to the crisis. Many of these stem from poor coordination arrangements, difficult planning. Local organizations in particular, I think, have found it difficult to operate in this environment, and I think many feel that their contributions have been undervalued and unappreciated. And I'm sure not deliberately so in many cases. Some of this is a function of the way the arrangements have been set up. So some of the questions that we want to explore today include what are the ongoing challenges in engaging with and supporting the Rohingya refugees? How can humanitarian agencies be more effective in responding to their needs in Cox's Bazar? And importantly, what can we learn from past Rohingya refugee responses? So I'd like to, we're very lucky today because we've got an interesting and distinguished panel with us, and I'd like to introduce them now. So I'll start with Mark Bowden, who's joining us by telephone link from Vienna. Hello, Mark.
Hi, Wendy.
Mark's, it's good to have you with us today, and thank you for taking the trouble. He's actually on holiday, I'll have you know, and he's agreed to join us even so. So Mark's a senior advisor with the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, and he's a senior research associate with the Humanitarian Policy Group here at ODI. He also wrote the lead article for the edition. Mark previously served from 2011 to 2017 in Afghanistan as the UN Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General, the resident coordinator, the humanitarian coordinator, and UNDP resident representative. And he was also the UN resident, sorry, there are so many acronyms here, and I usually just say the acronym, but I'm having to read them out now. Resident rep for Somalia from 2008 to 2011. And the UNMISS, the mission in Sudan, Director of Civil Affairs before that. Mark's also worked as the Chief of Policy Development and Studies at UN OCHA. And earlier in his career, when I first met him, he worked for Save the Children Fund as the head of the regional office for East Africa, as the Africa Director, and finally country director in Bangladesh. And was it that in 1978, Mark, that you were in Bangladesh?
It was indeed, yes, 78, 79.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much and welcome, Mark. And then on my left, we've got Ake Bore, is that correct?
That's correct.
Who is an operations manager of Médecins Sans Frontières in Amsterdam and responsible for MSF programs in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and South Sudan. That's an interesting region, actually. And over the last 14 years, she's worked with MSF in India, Bangladesh, Papua New Guinea, Chad, and the Central African Republic. managing a broad range of medical operations, from large-scale emergency responses to vertical medical programs such as sexual and gender-based violence, HIV, tuberculosis, hepatitis C, etc. And she holds a master's degree in social and political anthropology, specializing in social relations in Bhutan. We're also very pleased to have with us today, on my right, Nurul Islam, who is a well-known human rights lawyer and activist. Nurul was born in North Arakan, Rakhine State, and he's currently the chairman of the Arakan Rohingya National Organization, the ARNO, which is a peaceful political movement of the Rohingya people. And he is also the coordinator for policy affairs at the Free Rohingya Coalition, or the FRC. Nurul worked as a consultant on Arakan affairs in the Euro-Burma office in Brussels until 2010. So welcome, Nurul. And then last, but certainly not least, on my far left is Caroline Nursey. Caroline joined the BBC Media Action as the executive director in March 2009. She's on the board of CDAC, which is Communicating with Disaster-Affected Communities. And she's also the current chair of BOND. And Caroline's career includes nearly 10 years at Oxfam GB as a regional director, international director, and country director, during which time she worked on a number of humanitarian emergencies, particularly the Darfur crisis. So now, following the introductions, what we're going to do is have a bit of a discussion with our panel, and then we're going to open up the floor for you to ask questions and to have a discussion with you both in the room and online. So I'd like to start with Mark. And Mark, as we know, the government of Bangladesh, particularly with the upcoming election, is keen to show that they're treating the Rohingya influx as a temporary crisis. And I mean, how has the political context in Bangladesh further complicated the operational challenges involved in the response? I mean, especially with regard to refugee rights, access, and coordination and registration.
Well, let me start by saying that I think it's been fairly fundamental in affecting all those areas. You have to distinguish, I think, between the national politics and the local politics in the context, and bearing in mind that it's assumed that Cox's Bazar is not an area where there's been so much support for the current government's party, the Awami League, but is more BNP based. So there's a complication in terms of the overall politics of Bangladesh in the region. But the main, and I think that has had an effect on the overall response of the government of Bangladesh and the concern they show towards the issue. But more specifically, right from the beginning, the fact that that the government of Bangladesh was concerned about recognizing the refugee rights of the population affected the coordination structures that were put in place. Originally, the IOM was asked to take on coordination, and then a very strange, well, to my mind, a rather strange tripartite coordination structure that's a bit unwieldy has developed out of this, all in a sense because of the concern about recognizing the refugee status of the population. And with the current coordination structure, I think what has resulted from that is a mixture of treating this as a refugee emergency with UNHCR having to play a role, but also we've ended up without a humanitarian coordinator being appointed as would normally be the case in a level 3 in a large-scale emergency. So these factors, to my mind, mean that you don't necessarily get all the tools that you should have in coordination, including things like pooled funds that actually would have helped to address some of the concerns that have been raised about better local engagement and direct support for local organizations. So that's been one area on coordination. The second area in terms of the politics is at the local level. where people have been, the Rohingya coming in have been very constrained in their movements, and access to the camps has also been similarly constrained for agencies, certainly at the beginning. And of course, there is the remaining underlying threat of movement of a proportion of this population out of the Cox's Bazar area onto a temporary and artificial island. And then I think the final way in which I think the issue of refugee status and the politics have affected things are again at the local level, where I think the local Rohingya community who exist have felt increasingly at threat and fear potential political violence that may result from local antipathies and that have arisen from the local population in Cox's Bazar. I mean, I think there are a number of other ways as well, but I think that would summarize my concerns.
Thank you, Mark. I mean, you also note in your article that marginalization and exploitation of the Rohingya and the likelihood of increasing hostility towards them requires new approaches to protection and a protection framework that extends beyond the camps. What approaches do you think would work, and what would be the key elements of an effective protection framework from your perspective?
Well, what I was trying to draw attention to was the fact that there is both a local Rohingya population living in communities both in Cox's Bazar and in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, and that protection needs to be extended to them as well as to the Rohingya population in the camp. When I visited earlier, the local Rohingya, the longer established Rohingya groups in the local communities were really quite scared of what the future held for them. So by looking at a broader protection mechanism, I think it's looking at also the broader Rohingya community. The second area of concern is that there has been quite a lot of involvement of local criminal elements, not Rohingya criminal elements, but local criminal elements in terms of trafficking. And of course, drug running has been prevalent in the area. So I think that also requires an approach to protection that takes you outside of the camp environment and that looks at the Rohingya in the broader community, and to provide the sort of protection and support that they need from this form of exploitation. And the final area that I feel is important is there needs to be a far stronger advocacy and communications program within the local community of Cox's Bazar, because that does address some of the concerns of the local communities about the potential increases in or loss of money that some of the poorer labourers feel they have, and the economic disadvantages that are felt by the poorer elements of the community. Well, it's clear that the richer elements of the community in Cox's Bazar have done very well out of the situation. But part of protection, I think, is also far better and stronger communication program with local journalists and the local community.
Okay, thank you for that. And I wonder, Caroline, do you have any comments on that last point about the communication with journalists and others?
Yes. No. I mean, I'd agree with Mark. I think that. I think that we as Media Action have been trying to do some work with local broadcasters. Initially, what we were doing, we're still trying to do, is to help them to work out how to get the information into the camps that the camps need. So the focus was on communication with disaster-affected communities, rather than perhaps these more political issues behind it. Mm. But I do totally agree that that radio and press do need to be covering that, and it's actually a challenge to us, I think. How can we do more to help them to develop the skills to do that, and to do it in a way that isn't just going to fuel hatred?
Is this something that Internews is focusing on? Or?
They are doing work on it, which I think is important. Yeah.
Thank you. Mark, I've got one last question for you before we move on. In his article, Jeff Crisp, who's actually in the audience with us today, Jeff, sitting here, he reflects on the premature, involuntary, and unsafe return of large numbers of Rohingya refugees to Myanmar in the 1970s and 1990s. And as we just established, you were with Save the Children in Bangladesh in the late 70s, I think in 78 as a country director. And I just wondered, based on that experience, what do you think we can learn from past Rohingya refugee responses? And are we at risk of seeing this happen again? Are we just repeating the same patterns again?
Well, I think some things have improved as we've got, I would say, slightly better at managing relief operations, because I think one of the problems in 78, 79 was the quality of relief operations. There was a cholera epidemic. There was a very high death rate in Cox's Bazar at the time. And so far, as I mentioned in my article as well, I think people do deserve credit for averting the crisis within the crisis, at least in the early stages, because what I also omitted to say was that we have put the Rohingya in a particularly high-risk and very vulnerable environment with high levels of overcrowding, and I don't think we've learned from that, and that's one of the issues I think will continue to need to be addressed. I mean, the second area, which I think Jeff highlights very well in his article, is this whole issue of trying to push the Rohingya back when conditions are not appropriate or safe. And at the moment, it does appear that people are at least recognizing the importance of both the voluntary, safe and dignified nature of return, but there will be constant pressure, I think, to move back at least for a portion of the population as soon as possible, and that's something that I think needs to be addressed at the both the political level and will be a challenge for coordination.
Thank you very much. I'd like to turn now to Nurul, if that's okay. Nurul, the issue of statelessness is one of the key elements in the decades-long persecution of the Rohingya in Myanmar. And those who leave Myanmar risk not being recognized as refugees, as we've already said, as is the case in Bangladesh, and not being given the protections as a result that they're entitled to. In Amal de Chikra's article, he states that the problem lies in the lack of political will among the main actors to actually protect the Rohingya and to adequately address the root causes of statelessness, and the failure of the UN and INGOs to put human rights first and bring the perpetrators to justice. Do you agree with that? And if so, what do you think can be done about it?
Yes, I agree with Mr. Amal. In fact, this is the issue of statelessness is the main elements of Rohingya persecution, one of the main elements. And here I want to stress that we are not, we means the Rohingya, peoples are not illegal immigrants or something that the Burmese government is going to allege. We are very much indigenous to Arakan. Even it has been created. This statelessness has been created in order to expel, to exterminate the Rohingya from their homeland. Particularly this 1982 citizenship law, which has entrenched the Rohingya statelessness, is denying the Rohingyas, the histories, and denying their identity as a Rohingya, The Burmese authorities say that there is no Rohingya and these are the Bengalis. This is not the fact. With this, they are justifying making this in utter disregard of the international law. They make it a justification to impose suffocating restrictions and humiliatory restrictions on the Rohingya people. Actually, these Rohingyas are, in fact, this is a case of intolerance. They are not tolerated in the country on the basis of their religion, ethnicity, and a Southeast Asian appearance, in contrast to Southeast Asians of dominant Burma people. By all legal standards, and they are very much citizens of the country. However, there is one thing: the attitudes of the Burmese authorities must be changed towards Rohingya. For in the case of a command Muslim, there's also Muslim groups in Arakan. They are recognized as an ethnic group in Burma. Yet, from the 2012 violence, these people are still confined to, the concentration camps in Sittwe and the southern towns of Arakan. So this is in fact, as to the Rohingya situation, they are, these refugees who are in Bangladesh, they are these genocide survivors. They should be called by the proper name. This is according to 1951 Refugee Convention, that is refugee. And still, although the Bangladesh government is now using the term that they are forcibly displaced, Burmese national. The word Burmese national is there, they mention. And at the same time, until now, they don't withhold any the facilities on the Rohingya people. So, and among the actors, this is mainly one is the Burmese military, Burmese government, and the Buddhist Rakhine, and the international community. This is Burmese government, even the military. They are determined to exterminate the Rohingya people to the last man, because this Mia Online himself said in general, these people, we have to they continue the unfinished job right from the 1942. That means they want to finish the Rohingya people totally from the Rohingya Arakan. And the government of Aung San Suu Kyi is very much, we say that she's, and herself and her government is complicit in the genocide of the Rohingya, in the sense that she is now protecting the military people, and they're shielding the military activities and defending the brutalities of the military people. And then we have the Rakhine people with whom we are living together. We are living live together, and still we are living, and we have to live until Domesday. There is no problem. There the reason to have a problem, to career problem between our two sister communities. Yet, due to the instigations of the third party, there is an antagonism. This is the Rakhine people. They become an instrument in our persecution. Even that they think that, they used to say that they want to have a totalitarian domination of Arakan. Rohingya or Muslim had nothing to do in Arakan, and the Rakhine and the Buddhism are synonymous. This is their
No, well, sorry to interrupt. I just wondered, do you think there's anything that can be done by the governments or the international community to address these issues?
To address, this is the main thing, is that to address the Rohingya, the refugee, problem in particular, and the Rohingya, the crisis is what we should do. In my view, today 1 million Rohingyas are now today in Bangladesh refugee camp. They're living in the very overcrowded areas in a small geographical area. Even there are some social problems now going, such as local peoples are now voicing that this refugee cannot stay longer, because they also feel that they feel outnumbered by the refugees. At the same time, there's an environmental problem, and they also say they feel that they need to carry ID card now to move from place to place, local people. So they are not happy on with this. So in the same time, lots of the problem in the refugee camps, like a humanitarian crisis, the education and the healthcare, and particularly the vulnerable sections of people like the women and children. There's a risk of abduction by the human traffickers, and this is here the vital. This is a vital to increase the support for the Rohingya refugees. But humanitarian aid is simply as a symbolic. I could address the symbolic. First call this. This humanitarian aid to the refugee living in the camp. It should ensure the living conditions of the Rohingyas people, so they should be able to live in dignity. But we have to be mindful that the humanitarian can only address the symptoms of the challenges that affecting the Rohingya people. It will never address the root cause, which is the systematic violence and persecution and the marginalization that forced them to leave their homeland. The foremost priority for my people is to return home, to return to Arakan, to Burma, the country we love much. To Arakan, the place with which we have a psychological, the spiritual attachment with this. But we cannot return to our homeland. How? Because when there is still, the violence and atrocity crimes are going. In fact, there's a genocide is still going in Myanmar. The military government has no intention. I think the military and the government as well has no intentions of creating conditions for sustainable, the returns of the refugee. They already have achieved their goal. That is eliminating the Rohingya people. Rohingya people. And at the same time, land is the life of the people. Now they have all land abandoned by the Rohingya refugees and the banned land. All has been taken over by the Burmese government and declared the state ownership. And as Amal has mentioned one point, that is not only psychological, the ideological matter to expelling the Rohingya people, also economic reason there. That means, so this is one thing. The plans are now underway to establish, to set up so-called, what's called so-called special economic zone.
Right. Yeah.
That is in northern, in Mongdo Township.
Yes.
At the same time, there are large-scale schemes in now going to set up, the further, increasing Buddhist settlements on the Rohingya in all over the northern Arakan.
Nurul, can I interrupt you just for a minute? I'm sorry, because it's very interesting, but I think to give some of our other panelists an opportunity, and then I'll come back to you if that's all right, because we're going to continue the discussion. So thank you very much for that. I wanted to, go down to the ground again and look at the health situation. We know that MSF has been providing health care to Rohingya communities in Myanmar and Bangladesh for more than 30 years. And was it 2009, I think, that you established a presence in Cox's Bazar or started providing health care there?
It was much earlier than that.
It was much earlier than that,
but
okay.
The last move in Kutupalong was since 2009.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And I mean, given that you had a presence there, what were the challenges that you faced with this huge influx of over 700 people in a period of a few months?
The scale of things was, of course, so big that for anyone to respond to that, and all the NGOs had the same struggles, was very, very complex. When we were there with just one clinic for about 50 beds. And within a very short amount of time, we scaled up to about 400 beds, to 4 hospitals, 5 primary healthcare centers, 8 health posts, and off and on more where needed. And also the complexity of the health needs became bigger, of course, because of the large arrivals. Anything from seeing gunshot wounds to burns, bruises, mental health. We had already a mental health care program, but we scaled that up massively as well. And so far we've seen over 16,000 individual consultations within mental health and 18,000 group consultations. So, and that's only still a fraction of probably what's needed. We set up a large outbreak facility, so knowing that the primary healthcare situation in Rakhine for the Rohingya had been not very present, knowing that outbreaks could happen in a big camp like that. And that was, of course, the case. So we all know that diphtheria outbreak that happened, and it was a massive challenge to respond to as well. But also measles, jaundice, many other epidemics that did happen, and we're still responding to as we speak.
And you were one of the few actors on the ground at the time?
At the time, yes. I think there were maybe for international NGOs about 4 of us left, and there were still local NGOs responding as well, but health actors, we were one of the only ones. Yeah.
And you mentioned just now diphtheria, which was a particular problem, wasn't it?
It was.
And why was that such a problem in particular?
As one of our doctors said, it's a disease of the past. There hadn't been a big outbreak for over 50 years. And we also didn't have the knowledge anymore so much in our teams to respond actually to diphtheria. Besides the fact that the antitoxin was hardly available, there were only about 5,000 vials left in the world. There were a few other small outbreaks going on. In Yemen, there's another outbreak at the moment. But just the knowledge of the outbreak, of treating it, which antibiotics to give, we had to relearn everything. And again, it showed that the population had not been vaccinated, because it is a disease that nowadays, with simple vaccination, doesn't need to happen anymore. And it wasn't only children that we saw also adults coming in with diphtheria, which shows that there is a whole generation not having been vaccinated for a very long time. So yeah, we had to scale up that as well, while we were also responding to measles, scaling up the regular healthcare, learning, talking to doctors who had responded 50 years ago to the epidemic here at the London School of Tropical Medicine. So yeah, it was a lot of searching. I think it went well. The scale up did happen. We treated over 6,000 cases, but we couldn't save everybody. That's for sure. Yeah.
And I suppose in a case like this, I mean, one of the big lessons seems to be that sort of understanding what the health conditions are in the country of origin of a displaced population is important in terms of what access they have to healthcare and what the level of that healthcare is. Would that be a lesson maybe that could be learned from this?
Sure, and we were present in Myanmar, and for many years we tried to provide healthcare there, so we had some knowledge about it. We did know that people were not vaccinated, but I actually also, we didn't expect, at that time, we expected measles, cholera, we were prepared for it, but I think even diphtheria, we didn't see it coming, even in the other crises that we work. It is very rare. It's very rare that you still see the cases and that this outbreak happened. But it is a lesson learned to look where they come from and what the healthcare is that they've received over a long amount of time. Yeah.
And did you say that it's appearing in Yemen as well?
Yeah, diphtheria has also appeared in Yemen. There's still an outbreak going on there as well. Yeah.
So maybe will some of the lessons from your experience be?
Yes.
Yes.
We're treating it there as well.
Well, that's encouraging, isn't it? Yeah. I guess, too, we were curious to know, I mean, what level of healthcare is actually available to the Rohingya in the camps? You know, are people able to access secondary healthcare, mental health care support, treatment for chronic conditions and things like cancer? Or is it really very basic care that they're able to get?
My impression was, I was just there a few weeks ago, and I think primary healthcare, a lot of actors have come in, they are providing, there are a lot of health posts, primary healthcare centers. I had the impression that was, I mean, with all the limitations it has, relatively covered. I think secondary healthcare, there are still many gaps, specialized healthcare, maternal and child healthcare, mental health care. Indeed, there are services available from also different NGOs. The Ministry of Health has their services in the established hospitals. However, specifically on secondary healthcare, I think there's a room for a lot more, and there's not always enough beds available for patients that come in. Referrals to other facilities is difficult. So there's still a lot of work to do on that front. And also within the primary healthcare, the vaccination that needs to continue, because there are still new arrivals going on as we speak. And keeping up and doing the outreach and making sure that this massive camp is covered on all these aspects. There's a massive amount of work to be done still.
And so the Ministry of Health is coordinating that assistance, or is it done through the intersector coordination group, or they're part of that?
They're part of that. So we do
Yeah.
coordinate with the Ministry of Health as well as the intersection coordination group. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a hard one to say, intersector
Yeah,
coordination group, or what's the
think I've heard
acronym,
as well.
ISCG, or we just got to grips with the sort of
Yeah.
standard ones, yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Caroline, I mean, I want to move on to communications and accountability, but I guess the environment in which the response to the refugee crisis is being carried out has posed a range of challenges for operational agencies trying to communicate and engage with affected people. And I wondered if you could sort of outline what some of those challenges are and how agencies have tried to work together to overcome them.
I think there are some very specific challenges in this context, and which I'll say something about in a minute. I just wanted to say overall that I think actually it's been a pretty positive picture in terms of the acceptance that communication and engagement with communities matters. And some of that presumably comes out of the grand bargain and the recognition there that there was need for a participation revolution, and that any work that we do has to be rooted in the needs, views, priorities, solutions of the people who we're trying to serve. So we have found a much more fertile environment for communication with disaster-affected communities, or what's increasingly being called communication, community engagement and accountability, CCEA. So there's a nice new acronym for everybody. That actually it is being recognised in a way I've never seen happen before in a humanitarian response. I visited towards the end of November last year, so fairly early in the crisis, and finding right from the top and through there was people were open to this. There's been donor pressure to do that, although as Mark was saying, there've also been lots of problems with the way the overall matters have been set up. So funding for communication and engagement, along with everything else, has been very short term, which perhaps matters more for, well, it matters for everything, but does matter very much for communication. And I think that's part of the reason why some of the local NGOs have been squeezed out, which really matters because their voices around something like communication and community engagement are absolutely essential because they know more about it and what it's like. There have been a number of things that have helped to make it work. Preparedness work over the last few years. DFID funded the CDAC network to do some disaster preparedness work, which Media Action led, but it meant that actors across the country, communication specialists and mainstream NGOs of different sizes and the government had the chance to think through what this means and how to do it when a crisis hits, and that's made a big difference. The particular challenges, I mean, obviously language, and it's a very interesting one because the Rohingya language is not the same as the Bangla language. It's certainly very, very different from Burmese. Fortunately, the Chittagonian, the language spoken in the Chittagong Hills, is similar. And I think most of us agencies early on thought, great, we can get in Chittagong colleagues and they'll understand each other. Translators Without Borders have done some very interesting work to analyse the differences and similarities between the languages, and they say there is 70% overlap between Chittagong language and Rohingya, which sounds good, but then actually some of that 30%, it's really important vocabulary and can lead to profound confusion if the wrong word is used. And then you've got added complications that actually even the language spoken by the Rohingya people who've been there for a couple of decades and those who've just arrived has diverged. So the people who've been in Bangladesh, various various Bangla words have come into the language, whereas those who are still in Myanmar have taken on certain Burmese words or certainly Rakhine words, and that makes some of the communication, even between Rohingya who've been there for a long time and the recently arrived, tricky. We've been trying to do various work on that as the common services, the communication agencies working together. Translation Without Borders have been very helpful in trying to, in being clear what the key words are that can be understood in the various situations, and that's all available on a common platform, so any agency can use it. And producing non-branded materials on health or whatever it may be, which have the correct translation, so that anybody can pull them down, then can then brand them as they want to and use them. And translators have also trained interpreters and got people working together on that. Then, of course, there are the cultural barriers, and those particularly affect women. So you've got a lot of women who are confined to the house traditionally. It's therefore very difficult to engage with them, and more difficult than in every situation to avoid getting a very tilted view of what's going on by listening to male voices more than women. Illiteracy. The survey which Internews did early on suggested that 73% of the population who were arriving were illiterate. And of course the Rohingya language is not a written language, and even things like the counting system are distinctly different from that used in Bangladesh. It's actually very interesting. I understand it's on a 20 base rather than a 10 base, so rather than counting 1 to 10 and sort of starting again as we do, it's 1 to 20 and then starting again. So even straightforward translation of the numbers is quite tricky. And that's meant that a lot of the things we tend to think of using to communicate really don't work. There's no point putting up a poster if 4/5 of those around are not going to be able to read it. Even if you try to put a sign up, it isn't necessarily understood. So the sign to show that somewhere's dangerous, what tends to be used around the world is a circle with a line through it to show don't go in, this area is dangerous. We found that doesn't mean anything to people, but actually a hand put up as a sort of stop sign, hand painted red, does work. So again, that sort of detailed research that can then be shared across the humanitarian community makes a real difference. But it's quite subtle, because, the red hand works, but if you put up a white hand, that actually means it's clean and it's all fine. So you've very much got to get it right, or it can have the opposite effect from what's needed. Colours are interesting and have proved very useful, because if you get a document and you don't understand it, the only way you're going to know anything about it is what colour is the document. So you know that a red document is important because that's your papers. If the authorities then change it and some key paper that used to be red is now blue, you don't know that you should be keeping the blue one because you always kept the red one. So that sort of thing becomes critically important where you've got a community where very few people can read. That's interesting with drugs as well, apparently, because people will get used to a particular drug being a certain colour. They know that's okay. So I'm not sure if I'm getting this right. I think the birth control tablets were red. Now, if you then do any other tablet that's red, people think that they're birth control tablets and they may not want to take them. So all that kind of thing, which always matters, becomes more important. The Rohingya are not allowed properly to be using local SIMs in Bangladesh. Now that means that setting up a hotline where you can phone in and report something that's not being done right, it doesn't work. I mean, some people do have phones, but they're not officially allowed to have them. So you've got to find some other way of getting the feedback loop to work. We've found that one of the things that does work is that most community workers do have phones that work. So they will download materials, health materials or whatever it may be, and then use them as they're going around. And the survey that was done recently, actually can't remember whether it was the real-time evaluation or the evaluation of the common service, found that a lot of people were getting their information from other people's mobile phones. And that's not just accidental, it's because agencies have worked together to set out to get materials onto these phones where people can then let others listen or look. There's also low ownership of radios. So, we as an organisation, Media Action, we tend to use radios, but it's not terribly useful there because there isn't that much ownership and there isn't a tradition of listening to radio. So even if you do radio distributions, actually people aren't going to necessarily listen. What we have found works is getting some of that material in audio form distributed to the information hubs, and then people will go in and listen to the information hub, listen to things there. There are quite a lot of information hubs across the camps, and some of the early surveys found that those weren't really working because people didn't know what they were, partly if they've got information hub written up on them, even if you get the language right, if you can't read, people don't know what they are. But it seems now the latest feedback is suggesting that people do know what they are and are going there and are using them to find things out, but also to give feedback, and are mostly fairly satisfied with the responses they're getting to the feedback. So I think those are becoming increasingly important in the camps, and probably relatively more important in this response than in another one where phones might work.
No, that's very interesting. I mean, Ground Truth Solutions, Nick Van Praag and Kai Hopkins also wrote an article for the Exchange. And in their article, they highlight the systematic ongoing collection and use of feedback from affected people or refugees across the camps is missing from the response. And I just wondered if you agreed with that based on your experience. And if you do, how are operational agencies, again, attempting to address this issue? I mean, how do we move from collecting feedback to ensuring that affected people really have a voice in the decisions that affect them?
I think I partially agree. And maybe that's because we're one of the agencies trying to do something about it, because we've said that we run this thing funded by DFID with some of the other communication agencies, the Common Service, which not only is designed to get shared materials out there that people can use it, but is also meant to get information back from the various agencies where they've been getting feedback from communities. It gets it back, it anonymises it, it gets it out there for others to use. So we are finding that there are a lot of agencies are trying to get feedback from communities. Some aren't, but a lot are, and some are doing it reasonably well. There is, and some are then willing to share it. There is a reluctance sometimes to share, perhaps because people are worried that their agency will appear badly in it if there's lots of criticism. Actually, they won't, because the information that's then reused, it doesn't say what agency it is and who said it. But I think some are afraid of that. There's been some concern about data protection, particularly, I mean, in this country, we're all now completely paranoid about GDPR. And actually, again, it isn't an issue because all the information is anonymised. You can't get any personal data from it. But I think those have been barriers. But I think gradually we're overcoming them. What is then done through the Common Service, amongst other things, is to produce a fortnightly, quite short set of information which is available online called What Matters, and it's usually got in it something about communication in one way or other. So this one I've picked up here has got colours in the camps and how you communicate about them, but it's also got some feedback, usually on a particular area. So one of them here has got people feeding back that there's a real problem that the NGOs all start work at the same time that children are trying to get to school. And so the traffic jams are really bad and children can't get to school. Well, that's come from people talking to communities. It's then getting fed back. And what practitioners have said they like about the What Matters is that as well as consolidating some of the information and drawing conclusions, there are also quotes from individuals, which helps us, I think, to understand. So it's quite simply written, because it's aimed at aid workers who speak all sorts of different languages, and it's in English. And this seems to be working quite well. What we don't know is actually the numbers who are using it, because people download it. But the qualitative feedback is that people are finding that valuable. So, I mean, I think Ground Truth is absolutely right that the information is not being collected as systematically as it might be, and probably even more that it's still not being shared. But I think mechanisms are in place that will allow it to happen if agencies can be encouraged to do it. You know, in the end, it's that old thing of how do any of us take account of what we're being told? I mean, how do we learn? And I think in a humanitarian situation, everybody is so busy. It's very difficult to get people at the right points in the organisation to look at the feedback that's coming and then adapt accordingly. That's the fundamental challenge.
Thank you for that. I'd like to move on to our question and answer session with all of you. But Nurul, I wondered if I could ask you just a quick question before we do that. I mean, you've been hearing a lot of talk about how people are affected and from other people's perspectives, and what the humanitarian response consists of, what some of the challenges have been. But what's the feedback that you're getting from people on the ground, Rohingya people on the ground in Bangladesh, your other contacts? How do they think humanitarian responders are doing? What we need to do or change to better support them?
Actually, this humanitarian crisis is immeasurably great, both in refugee camps and inside Rakhine State as well. But as to the solution, the only solution is the Rohingya people, the refugee, should be able to go back to their homeland in dignity and with full protection.
Sure.
So this is the only solution. We call it the protected return to our protected homeland. So for this, we are appealing the international community, calling on the international community and the UK government to do. I want to give the the point here to mention. The one is, it needs to increase pressure on Myanmar and its utmost and the foremost ally, the China. This is very important. The second thing is support credible accountability efforts. To ensure the victims see the justice, the served, and cycle of violence is not repeated. And at the same time, it includes the referring the situation to in Myanmar to the ICC, International Criminal Court. A strengthened targeted sanction against the military people, Tamador. And it should be the beyond the symbolic target, symbolic sanction. And particularly it should target the military interest. The trade preference must be linked to condition on human rights, and it needs to see the Rohingya, tangible progress in the situation of the Rohingya people. The other thing, vocally support the Rohingya people's rights to be recognized as one of the ethnic nationality of Burma. Rakhine. At the same time, to restore their full citizenship, consistent with the other ethnic nationals of the countries. And they support efforts to establish a stabilization force. Because this is one thing, you have to understand that the cost of inaction is more than the cost of action. Because how long these refugees will be fed by the international community here. It's at the same time local problem here, at the same time how long Bangladesh will be going to look after them. This is the major problem, international community, how long this is the guarantee. So the better is these people should be better, look after inside their homeland. So for this we need stabilization forces. These stabilization forces, will facilitate the peaceful repatriation process, and it has stemmed the further the future violence. This will serve the confidence building measures between the Rohingyas and other ethnic people, and at the same time it helped build peaceful coexistence between the disease. And at the same time this stabilization force can also counteract radical threat that may themselves be present in the region. The other thing is consult directly with the Rohingya people. We have the very bad experiences in 1978, 1991, refugees. Because sometimes there's a forced repatriation was happening. So refugees should be consulted directly, the Rohingya people, to ensure Rohingya views shape the terms of all future repatriation efforts and meet the demands, our demand for protected return to our place of origin, access to security, justice and livelihood, healthcare, education, social, welfare, and the compensation. That's very important, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, that direct consultation is something that, we're trying to get at in a number of different ways, but certainly on the political solutions is absolutely necessary as well. Okay, I'd like to open the floor now for questions and comments from the audience, both in the room and online. I'm going to take 2 or 3 at a time, and if I could ask you to give us your name and any institutional affiliation you might have. Yeah, Craig?
Hi, my name is Craig Volters. I'm a research fellow in politics and governance at ODI. Thanks a lot to all the panel. That was really, really useful and interesting. A lot of what I've heard talks about political will. It's in the document here, and a lot of what you've said. But can we try and what I'd like to hear from the panel, I suppose, is to unpack what that actually looks like. I think we're hearing a lot of solutions and what we'd like the end state to be, which I think most people can agree on in the room. But how do we get there? Like, where is change actually most likely to come from? So if we're looking at Myanmar or Burma and looking at the current government, are there reformers that can be worked with? Are there spaces where the international community can engage and make a difference on this? Because a lot of this feels like advocacy, and that has a role, and the international community has a role, but there's a lot of development actors in Myanmar and Burma. There's a lot of different processes ongoing. So where is change most likely to come from? What can we do to actually influence political will? Who are the people? Where are the spaces? So that's kind of to the whole panel, as much as you'd like to engage with that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm going to take Margie and then...
Thanks. Margie Buchanan-Smith. I'm a Senior Research Associate with ODI, but I carried out the real-time evaluation of the CWC, Communicating with Communities, the real-time evaluation of the coordination of the Communicating with Communities. And particularly interested in what Caroline was saying, reflecting on the communication aspect. One thing is more of a comment, and the second is a question. In terms of a comment, I think, as you said, Caroline, it was impressive how communications was seen as central to the response early on, but at the same time, it was rather disappointing to see how many months it took agencies to talk to each other, to share feedback information, particularly from the information hubs. There was these 3 big models, UNHCR, IOM, and my mind's gone blank, UNICEF, with the 3 agencies running lots of those info hubs. And in April, which was 8 months after the influx, that data wasn't being shared between the agencies. So I think there's some questions we need to ask ourselves as within the humanitarian sector about why we're so slow to kind of share. But the second thing I wanted to mention, which is, well, it's a question really, on the communication side. So it's really important that we're getting feedback on the humanitarian response, but how far should communications go in such a politicized crisis to actually be listening to people's voices about what they think the political solution should be, what they think about the protection issues. So it's straying into that much more political domain. And how far do we go as humanitarian agencies in the kind of communications field?
Thanks, Margie. Yes, you had a question.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Nasiruddin, I'm from Bangladesh. I'm here affiliated with the Refugee Studies Center at the University of Oxford, and also research consultant with the Department of Anthropology and Sociology at SOAS. I have a couple of very small addition to the discussion. First of all, that when Mark was talking about that there's a kind of distinction between national politics and local politics, and the local political leaders were elected from BNP, I think that's not true, because the last from 2008 and 2014, two parliament elections at the time. Awami League government now in power. Actually, the local member of parliament was elected from Awami League. So there's no political distinctions between central and local setup. But the point is, he was right in a sense that, yes, the local perspective, local political perspective towards the Rohingya refugees and the central, states approach is quite different. Why different? Then we'll talk a bit later. Just this one point. Another point is this Nurul Islam was talking about that should be recognized as refugees because of 1951 refugee conventions. Just to give kind of corrections, that Bangladesh is not is one of the signatory states of 1951 refugee conventions. So that's the one reason. At the same time, now there's a biometric database made by the Bangladesh government. It's almost 1.1 million people recorded. And they are identified not as forcibly displaced Burma citizen. They are officially now designated as forcibly displaced Myanmar nationals. There's one. There's a couple of just addition, and back to Caroline. The CHT language is very similar to Rohingya language. Is not true because Chitang Hill Tracts is a home to 11 ethnic minority groups. They are Chakma, Marma, Tripura. They have every ethnic group, they have their own language. But Rohingya people speak in a particular language which is very similar to the Chittagonian language, the regional dialects. The dialects of Bengali language. But you are very much true that the new arrivals and the old Rohingya refugees and the local Chittagonians is quite different. Just to give you a footnote, I've been working on the Rohingya refugees for more than 2 decades. And I was born in Cox's Bazar, so I was brought up there. So I'm quite familiar with the dialects because I can speak Rohingya language better than the Rohingya do. So that's one. And you are very much right. There's a Kuri. 1 to 20, 1 to 40 is a Kuri. Every Kuri, you understand what I mean. That's one to add. And finally, back to you, that when you were talking about ICC, International Criminal Code, there's a kind of attempt initiated by the ICC, and one of them, Bangladesh appointed prosecutor, Professor Payam Akavayan, recently gave a lecture at Oxford. I was there as a resource person. And Myanmar is not actually one of the member states of ICC. So ICC doesn't have any jurisdiction to do anything. Just even Bangladesh, if Bangladesh claimed that there's genocide, taken place, but ICC cannot do. ICC only can do by its own initiatives on the ground of deportation. That's what the legal, internationally, ICC, in 1948 ICC, framework and Rome Statutes framework only Myanmar could be, brought under justice. And
I'm going to have to stop you there because otherwise we won't have time for any answers or other questions. So I'm sorry about that. But let's move on, and we'll have the panelists respond to some of your comments. Thank you very much. Let's start with those. I mean, Jill, I think I should say that this is an event that is being held by the Humanitarian Practice Network, and we're really usually focused on humanitarian practice, and we've had quite a lot of that today. But because of the specific context here, inevitably, the politics are of an even higher profile than they are in most other conflict situations or humanitarian emergencies. And I think that's why we have this kind of mixture of topics, and you see that in the exchange. So I'm saying this partly in response to Craig's question, because of course we're not specifically focusing in HPN on the politics, but you absolutely can't ignore them, and especially in this context because of the situation. But I want to go back to Mark now, who's I hope is still online with us. Mark, do you have any I don't know if it's answers for Craig or responses to Craig's question about the political will and what that looks like, and how do we actually get there or achieve change?
Well, I think that it's important to recognize that humanitarian action always has to be politically informed, even if we're not necessarily political. And I think one of the key issues here is the seeming change that has taken place in terms of the regional politics. From what I understand, I felt that Bangladesh had hoped to have had more support from India in the past, which now seems to have moved over to support of the Myanmar government. And also there's concern about China's role. So if you want to address the issue of political will, it in part has to come from the influence of the region on all the parties involved. And in particular, I think India and China are important players in this area. The region, I think, is also taking a stronger interest. And then the other issue of political will is the role the Secretary General can play. I don't think this is an issue for the Security Council, because it's not a threat to stability in the terms of the Security Council. But the Secretary General's good offices, I think, are important, and the role of the Special Envoy to Myanmar, I think, can be highlighted. I mean, the Secretary General did visit and drew attention to the problem, but I think there needs to be far more active engagement from the Secretary General side to try and ensure that there is an appropriate solution to the situation.
Thank you, Mark. I'm actually going to, Jeff, I wonder if I could put you on the spot. And given your article in the Exchange, and you focused on the failures of the past in terms of refugee response, what have you got any thoughts you can share with us?
I've got to confess to begin with that this article took me 25 years to write. And it originated from a meeting I attended at UNHCR headquarters in 1993 at the height of one of the successive Rohingya refugee emergencies, where a senior staff member concluded the meeting by saying the Rohingya are primitive people. At the end of the day, they'll go where they're told to go. And what I suggest in the article was that attitude towards the Rohingya has very much informed the UN's approach to the refugee situation in the region over the years. And I look specifically at two specific repatriation operations in the late 70s and early 90s, both of which did not meet UNHCR's own standards for safety, dignity and voluntariness. And I look at the way in which UNHCR essentially either turned a blind eye to the forced repatriation of Rohingya refugees to Myanmar, or indeed in some senses colluded with those episodes. And under your very careful editorial guidance, I've edited a final section to the paper which is basically saying, could this happen again? We've seen forced repatriation to Myanmar on 2 occasions, and what are the prospects for this happening again? I sit on the fence a little bit on this issue. I come to the conclusion that there are some reasons why we might expect it wouldn't happen again. There's a lot more media publicity on this situation now than there was in the 1970s and 1990s. I think if there were abuses perpetrated on the refugees in order to force them to go home, this would be picked up internationally by the media much more than in the 2 previous occasions. I also think, I've not been there recently, but from everything I've read and the surveys I've seen, the Rohingya themselves seem to be much more adamant about their rights, protecting their rights, and not going back until the time is right, making repatriation strictly conditional on a resolution of the citizenship and human rights issues, which, again, is perhaps a little bit different from the 2 previous episodes. At the same time, I suggest that there is some kind of cause for concern. Very quickly, what are the causes for concern? Well, firstly, there's clearly an impetus both on the part of Bangladesh and on the part of donor states that they would like to see this situation resolved as quickly as possible by repatriation, so that's a little bit disturbing. You have the fact that UNHCR and UNDP have signed an MOU with the Myanmar government, which hasn't been published, which has a secrecy clause in it, and to the best of my knowledge, no refugees were consulted in the formulation of that MOU between the UN and the government. You have the fact that a lot of the discussion around return and reintegration now focuses very much on the socio-economic aspects. So, for example, I think there was a press release from the Myanmar government yesterday about building shelters for returning refugees, and we all know that shelter is not the most important issue. It's citizenship and human rights are the real issues. And then I guess a final cause for concern is if you look at refugee policy globally, where we're at is very much with the Global Compact on Refugees and the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework is looking for longer-term developmental approaches which provide livelihoods to refugees, but which also meet the needs of host communities. To the best of my knowledge, and I need to do a little bit more research on this, but to the best of my knowledge, UNHCR's efforts and the UN's efforts generally to convince the Bangladesh government to pursue this more developmental approach have been rebuffed so far, because basically Bangladesh doesn't want to consider the long-term presence of the refugees. So it still leaves a prospect that more and more pressure will be exerted on the refugees in order to get them to repatriate prematurely, which on the basis of the historical experience I look at in the article is how would the UN and UNHCR particularly respond if that situation arises for a 3rd time.
Thank you very much. Can I go back to Margie's question now and maybe refer that to Caroline? And I don't know, Ake, if you have anything you want to say about this. Margie was talking about there's still quite a long way to go in terms of. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I really agree. It's been too slow, Margie. And I think while it was very interesting reading what you and Marion have written about the picture in April, and then looking at the evaluation of the common services, which I think the research was done in August, and seeing the movement that had happened by then, it needed to have happened before April. And I think it goes back to a lot of the things that Mark was talking about at the beginning, and the lessons we've learnt over and over and over again and not applied. And although when I visited last November, there was a very good person in place leading the communication area, then there was a gap. There was nobody, and the coordination didn't happen. And again, the funding was all short term, which meant that all the things that needed to be put in place were delayed. Could I go into the second part of I mean, I thought the second part of what you were saying about how far is the purpose just to get information to the Rohingya and get feedback from them about what isn't working, and how far is it to go beyond that to real communication? I think we have to be doing the real communication, and part of what we have to be doing is to put people in a position where they can make the right decisions. And some of the most fundamental decisions will be if there's ever when there's a question of return, for them to decide whether or not that's the right thing to do, or to decide whether they try to become Bangladeshi, or all these things. Now that's far, far more than the provision of information. It's trying to provide safe spaces where people can talk, where they aren't pressured by a particular element in the community. It's all extremely complex, but absolutely within what I think we all have a responsibility to be doing. I've got copies of the What Matters here, by the way, just various different ones, if anybody wants to grab these afterwards. in some of these, there is people are already asking and raising questions about all these issues. It's not just we worry about food and all this follows later. They are thinking about all these matters.
And I suppose too, when you're talking about having access to the adequate information to enable you to make an informed decision, then that also can involve others like legal experts, a whole range of other actors. And so how do we put people in touch with those people? How do we facilitate that sort of engagement? Thank you very much. I'm not going to be able to let every panelist answer every question because we'll run out of time, but I've got some questions from our online audience I'd like to put to the panel. The first one's from Tara Gingerich from Oxfam. And she says, Wendy, you mentioned that many local actors have felt sidelined in terms of participating in the response. Could your guests say more about the ways in which local actors, government, and civil society have been able to lead and participate in the response and the barriers that they've faced? I think I was also referring to, we have at least 2 or 3 articles in the exchange. One is written by someone from BRAC, another researcher who's been working with a local Bangladeshi organization in Cox's Bazar, who's been supporting the refugees there. And also from ground truth's perspective, gathering feedback from people. So I think if we were looking more at local organizations, also I see Carrie's in the audience here. And Carrie wrote a very interesting article based on some research she's been doing looking at dignity and how the Rohingya refugees in Cox's Bazar perceive dignity and whether the response is a dignified one from their perspective. And so this was looking at the whole range of local actors, but really focusing in more, I think, on local NGOs. And Carrie, I wonder if you want to say a word about what your research revealed about what is the local.
Well, to the point of how local actors are being sidelined, I think it's incredibly important. I think they very much are being sidelined. And in terms of things like the grand bargain, there is a lot that could be done to make the response more local. So I will say that up front, first off. From our own research, one of the things we are looking at is kind of testing the hypothesis of if a more locally led response would bring more dignity to the people, the affected population. And what we actually found is that that's not necessarily true for a couple of reasons. And for the Rohingya in particular, one is that they don't necessarily feel that the Bangla community is local for them. And so when we think about locally led responses and displacement, you're not necessarily talking about the affected community leading the response, you're talking about the host community leading a response. And what that means is that you really need to think quite carefully about if there are any tensions that exist between the host community and the affected population. And this also held true in our second case study, which was in looking at displaced Syrians in Lebanon and issues that arise between these two communities as well. But then for 2 other reasons, this wasn't necessarily important to the affected community. So whether this is important for capacity building and grand bargain is a totally separate issue. But what we were looking at with dignity is do people actually care? And for one, they could rarely tell us whether the people who were helping them were local or international, whether that was because they couldn't read or they just didn't care, because what was important was that their needs were being met and that aid was being given to them in an appropriate way. And the few times that they did know the difference, it was hard for us to discern whether or not the difference was actually there, because a lot of international organizations are hiring Bangla staff. And so you could go to an international distribution and it be given out by Bangla staff, and that could, in their minds, be a local organization, but actually be international. And so that line between international and local is quite fuzzy already. And so what we were trying to do is really get the affected population's point of view. And from their point of view, I think localization isn't really on their minds necessarily. The things that they care about are that they're treated well, that they're given respect, that they get the aid that they need to survive. And so that's kind of what came from our research.
Thank you, Carrie. I don't know if anybody else wants to. Aka, did you have anything you wanted to say on?
Maybe just to react on that.
Yes, do.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you-
Microphone.
yeah.
No, I think that is, I just listening to you, I mean, you have to realize we do work as an international NGO with almost 3,000 staff, of which we have about 1,000 Rohingya volunteers, as we refer to them, I think that's known, as well as 2,000 Bangladeshi staff. And I think the engagement that way, yes, there are international staff obviously as well, and at one point we were over almost 200, I think. We're reducing now quite a lot. But the engagement that way, I think, is massive. And I do think, especially with the outreach team in the camp, the feedback we do get from the beneficiaries, which are also included host population. I think it's important that we look at the whole entire area because everybody is affected by what's happening, and we try to keep that as a topic all the time in our communication with our patients, with the communities that we visit. I think you do. I see it basically as one big group as well, to not try to distinguish too much at the current phase that we're in.
Mm. And I understand from many of the authors of the articles of this edition that local government is very much in a leadership role in many parts of the response, and then of course they're an integral part of the intersector coordination group as well. So on that front, there is leadership being exercised. I think for local humanitarian organizations, local in the sense of Bangladeshi ones responding to the crisis in Cox's Bazar, they found it very difficult to penetrate the international coordination structure initially. And because it was actually different from what we usually do in these situations, that made it even more complicated. And the usual problems of meetings being held in English and not being clear, hearing by word of mouth that you might want to come along to this meeting rather than there being anything very systematic about it. I'm sure that's improved over the course of time, but these were some of the things that were raised in the articles that we received. I've got a question from Matthew Hunt, who's a student from the University of Southampton. And Matthew, again, this is one for you probably, Ake, but others may want to comment. I'm interested to ask if there are any mental health support networks in place for the refugees alongside the vaccines and antibiotics that tackle physical health. What are the main barriers to providing this support? I mean, you did mention this, but perhaps you can go into more detail.
Well, within what I can talk for MSF, within our clinics we have mental health support, anything from counseling to psychiatric support, including psychiatric medication. We have focused obviously a lot on, for example, patients that present after sexual violence and support the proper care for mental health after that, but also the general trauma. What's happening in the camp and more widely, I don't know all the details at the moment, so I couldn't comment on the widely available and other NGOs. Maybe there are people here that are also providing mental health. Mm-hmm. But for MSF, yes, there is definitely services, and within our outreach we focus a lot on that to make it clear these are available. Also there's of course a lot of cultural differences and people maybe not knowing what support they can look for within the health facilities that we have. So there's a lot of outreach going on to explain what services are available and what people can benefit from related to mental health.
Yeah, and I feel I should say that the last edition of the Humanitarian Exchange was focused not on Bangladesh or mental health support there, but on mental health and psychosocial support in humanitarian crises, which some of you, and Matthew in particular, who's put through this question, might be interested to look at. Thanks, Ake. I'm going to move on so that we can get a few more in before we finish time. I've got a question from Mia Marzato from Translators Without Borders, who Caroline was just talking about. And she says, as Caroline rightly pointed out, language barriers are an important constraint in the response. Language barriers are also faced by local responders, as coordination meetings are held in English, as I just said, and meeting efforts and key documents, meeting reports, I need my glasses really, meeting reports and key documents are rarely translated into Bangla. How can global localization efforts help overcome these barriers at field level? I feel tempted to go to Caroline first, since...
I agree. I think writing things in very clear English helps. If it's not yes, some of the responders will have no English at all, but some of them will have English and can read them if they are written simply. we should, of course we should, all of us be providing the materials in Bangla as well. The reality of the speed that people are working is that I don't think that often happens. And I think in meetings it's even more difficult, because ideally you would have all coordination meetings at least bilingually, English and Bangla. The reality, I don't know. I don't know if it's deliverable.
Anybody else like to comment on that? Nurul, would you?
No.
We're talking about the language issues and how can localization kind of support making sure that people get the information and the services and the languages that they use.
This gentleman has narrated.
Yes.
The local people, Rohingya language and this southern part of Chittagong, particularly Cox's Bazar area, there's no communication gap actually. It's communicable actually. Although there's Caroline has mentioned that those who are from Burma, from Rohingya, there's a mix of some the Burmese word on Bangladesh side, some Bangla word is a mix, but it's a still communicable one. I don't think so much any problem if we were communicated between two people actually, in fact.
So you think it's the problem is being overemphasized?
No, that is. Yeah, I think for communication between the Rohingya and the local people, I don't think there is much problem. In fact, yeah.
Maybe though between the aid community and the Rohingya.
But for the aid group, those who are working in the aid camp, they should understand these. I mean the actual feeling of the refugee. This is a very important thing. How they feel, how they perceive those who are working there. That's important.
Yes.
First, suppose here is a dignity. What dignity means actually? It is not that you are feeding the Rohingya people in the refugee camps where the aid groups are given enough there. But it doesn't mean that this is still the refugee feel that this is they don't want to lead a life of humiliations as refugees and beggars in the refugee camp. This is still they don't have dignity. They don't feel dignified. Yeah.
Well, I actually was going to call on the person behind you very quickly who hasn't spoken yet. And because we're running out of time, so this will actually be the last either question or brief question or brief comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the last one. Sorry. My name is Ronnie. I'm a Rohingya and work with Mr. Nurul. So in terms of translation, I think if there is very crucial information is there, a visual representation through a video, it's much more workable and functional than to translate it in any other languages, because Bangla itself is very different from the Rohingya language itself. My question will be to because it's a humanitarian meeting we're here, I wanted to know the level of international funding available for the Rohingyas and what is the next plan, because if the funding reduces, then we will see new kind of problems coming up in the coming years. Thank you.
I don't know that anybody can actually answer that question overall, that any of us here are in a position to answer that, unless we have somebody in the audience who wants to attempt. But I think it's a good question, and it is something that people are looking, especially when we're looking at a longer term response, which is certainly going to be necessary as opposed to the more of the short term approach that has been taken to date. I'm afraid that we're just about out of time. I wanted to thank everyone for coming today. I think it's been a really interesting discussion. I hope you'll find interesting and enjoy reading this edition of The Exchange. Please do share it with others that you know who might be interested. We're always interested in feedback too. This event, I should have said at the beginning, has been streamed live online. There's a video recording that will be on the ODI website, I think tomorrow or the following day, within the next couple of days. And I hope that those of you in the room will join us outside for some refreshments and to continue the discussion and do some networking, since we are the Humanitarian Practice Network. And I'd like to extend a special thanks to our panel for coming today and making the time to be with us, and especially to Mark, who's joined us on the line from Vienna. So thank you very much, Mark. Are you,
Right, thanks to you, Wendy. Thanks.
you're still there? Okay. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event soon. Thank you.